Hi there, and welcome to Leveraging Power and Influence. My name's Karen. I'm one of the facilitators from Capfinity, and I'm here to take you through this webinar. Now, from my experience as a psychologist and getting a chance to observe so many different people in different types of organizations, what really strikes me is that in some shape or form, we all have an element of power. It might not look like what we would traditionally see as power, such as, a politician having power or a CEO having power, but there are other types of power that we can have. The other thing that I think is so important to keep in mind when we talk about power is that actually power is nothing unless you can turn it into influence. So we're going to be looking at both aspects, right? Power as well as influence. But what is the difference between the two? Well, power is very much around your capacity to make others act a certain way or believe in something. Whereas with influence, you can't necessarily make someone do what you want, you have to persuade them to do it. Now, when we're talking about power, let's look at the work of French and Raven that started in the 60s about the different types of power that we might see. So they first talk about positional power, and positional power is where kind of is that traditional sense of power where our authority or our position gives us that power over others. And they describe four different types of power. So the first one is legitimate power, and it's about very much what I have. So if I have a title, for example, of CEO or senior manager, it gives me legitimate power over a group of people. It's very situational, right? I might have power over a certain group of people, but not others. Let's say I have the title of chief fire officer. So I might have the power to tell people to get out of the building if there is a fire, but actually I might not have any power to get people to behave courteously towards each other. The second type of power is reward power, and this is very much around what I can give. Think about the people who decide who gets grants, right? Gives them a lot of reward power. There's also coercive power, what it is that I can take. So if as a manager, for example, I can take away your role, I can fire you, or I can stop you from getting published, whatever it is, or I can take away your qualifications or how you practice, can take away your license, that gives me coercive power. And then finally, there's also resource power. What do I control? What access do I have to the resources that you need? Now, this is the only type of power that French and Raven identified. There is also personal power, and this has very little to do with authority. It's much more about our mindset, about our attitude, and how we behave around others. And what the research tells us is that when leaders rely on personal power, their team are much more likely to feel engaged, to feel empowered, and to feel motivated. So this is a more effective type of power to use. The other good news is that we can actually develop this type of power. So let's quickly see what it might entail, and then we'll delve a little bit deeper into each one. So personal power can be around referent power. And this is very much to people like you. Think about it. We are much more likely to say yes to people that we like. The next type of power is information power. And this is very much around what you know. Then there is expert power. What special abilities do you have? What skills or qualifications do you have that people might need? And finally, there's connection power. Who do you know? So let's start with the first two. We're going to look at reference power, we like you, and expert power, special abilities. And this is very much around warmth as well as competence. And often there's a question, which is the most important? Well, Machiavelli used to say you can't have both, so it's important that you instill fear. But actually the research shows a completely different picture. Before people decide what they think of your message, they decide what they think of you. Think about a politician who you deeply dislike. They might very quickly come to mind. Now, chances are you will see anything they say through an extremely critical lens, and you will find it really hard to find anything about what they talk about that you resonate with or agree with or like. And it's because, I mean, first of all, you will logically might disagree with them, but there's also something around how much more critical we are of people that we dislike. In fact, Amy Cuddy and some of her colleagues did a piece of research on this. And they found that when we interact with people, we generally subconsciously look for these two things, the level of competence and the level of warmth. And it has a huge impact on how we behave towards people. So imagine meeting someone who is both cold and incompetent. The first thing that comes to mind is when we go to a restaurant, right? And the waiter is so unfriendly and aloof and doesn't particularly care in welcoming us, etc. And they also get our order wrong. Chances are you might feel contempt, right? But compare that reaction to a waiter who has made a connection with you, has welcomed you, you've had a bit of a chat, and they get your order wrong. You won't feel contempt. You might feel pity. You might want to help them out. You'll be like, oh, it's okay. Now, clearly, both of these elements don't particularly help us succeed in organizations. But what if we are competent and cold towards others? What's the impact there? Where generally people tend to envy us. And as a result, they're less likely to want to support us or help us. Sometimes people might resent us. Compare that to the difference when people perceive us to be both competent and warm. That is where admiration comes in. So this is where we get most of our power. When we are likable, when we know what we're doing, but we're also likable, we are much more likely to get people who willingly follow us. In fact, Folkman did a piece of research on this and looked at different organizations. And what he discovered was the very top people in the organization, the very top managers, most of them, 61% of them, were dominant in the warmth element. So it's something to think about, right? We need to focus on both. I think competence comes without saying, but maybe warmth is one that we might not give as much importance to. But the reality is that when people work for us, meet us, interact with us, subconsciously, they're going to be asking two things. One, can I trust you? And two, can you help me? So, what can we do to get an answer of yes to both these questions? Well, there are simple things such as being willing to give generously when it comes to your time or to your advice, to your information. It's about being present when you are in conversation with someone. It's about being willing to listen, being open to other people's point of view. When we can get a yes to both these things, we have a very high chance of increasing our personal power. Now, let's look at the next type of power, and that is information power. And this is very much around what you know. I remember having a client of mine who used to work for the FDA, and now he works for a pharma company. You can imagine how much power this person has within the pharma company. Why? Because he has information that other people really value, that is really important. If he knows what it truly takes to get a drug on the market, well, that is highly valuable information, right, within a pharma company. The same thing with us. There will be information that we have that is going to be very important for other people, and this can give us power. So, in a way, we need to think about two things. Firstly, these two questions here. What do I know that others don't? So, for example, you might have been through a grant application process and you might have gotten that grant, and so you know what's important there. And so other people who might be applying for a similar type of grant, in years to follow, might find that you have a lot of power because you can give them information that is extremely useful for them. So then that leads us to the second question. What might others come to me for? Now, for them to be able to come to you, they need to know that you have this information. So the second thing to reflect on is how can you promote what you know? And whether that's information on your bio, so if people search your name, they know exactly what information you have access to, but also it could be what you talk about in meetings, right? And in interactions. The final type of power for us to think about is connection power. And this is very much around who you know. And in a way, this tells us that there is so much benefit that we can get from investing in developing and growing our network. Now, a high quality network isn't just about a lot of people, it's actually the type of people that are in our network that's really important. So, when we're thinking about our network, here are some of the things to reflect on. First of all, do you have experts in your network? These are people who have specialized knowledge that is really important that people are going to seek. Now, one of the things to keep in mind when it comes to experts is something called network influencers. So, network influencers are people who are highly credible, they have a lot of knowledge, so they are experts, but they're also highly visible. And so much so that these are the people who are most sought after by others. Now, here's the thing. Robert Cross discovered that only 5 to 15% of available experts in any scenario in any organization generally are sought. Why? Because the rest of the people might be less visible. And to me, this makes us think about, we can think about it in two different ways. So, first of all, think about the experts that you have in your network. Are there the people who are most visible, right? Are they the people who everyone else is seeking? Because this might create real bottlenecks. You might need something from them, you might need information from them, but they are so busy, they don't have the time to give it to you. Would it be worth you finding people who have a similar type of expertise, but maybe they're less visible, they're less sought after? The other thing is think about you. If you want to be sought out as an expert, again, it's important that you get visible, that people know what you can offer. The next type of person to think about to have in our network are our peers. These aren't people that we compete with, but these are people that we collaborate with. So we might work on, pieces of research together, on a paper together. We might apply for a grant together. So we collaborate. We also need to think about rising stars. These are people who are showing a lot of promise. So when you can support them and help them, you might reap really huge rewards later on in the future. We also need to think about having outliers in our network. These are people with unlike minds to us. They are the ones who are going to challenge us, challenge our perspective, and hopefully widen and broaden our thinking. And then finally, we also need connectors. And connectors are those people who always seem to know someone who can connect us with others. In fact, if we have even just one connector in our network, it gives us a ready-made network where, we have access to their network and they can help connect us. Now, it's not just about the network that we have, right? It's also about how we are behaving with that network. And so we need to think about how do we bring influence to our interactions. So when we look at the research, Robert Cialdini, Jökull and Falb as well have done a lot of research as to the different types of ways in which we might influence others. And they identified 6 different types, which are here on the screen today. Now, as we go through this, have a think about which is your most comfortable style of influencing others. I know that Jekyll and Fall, for example, identified that logic is one of the most commonly used styles. But that doesn't mean that logic is always going to be effective. And so the invitation here is to think about what other styles or types of influence you can bring in your interaction to make you even more effective. So the first one that we're going to talk about is social proof. And social proof is when other people are doing the thing that you'd like whoever it is to do. So showing, hey, for example, everyone in this team is going on this training course is likely to influence that one person who hasn't gone yet to also go on the same course. Why? Because if others are going on this course, then it should be I should do it as well. We see review sites, right? Like TripAdvisor, for example. This is very much social proof where people look at what others think before booking a hotel. Logic doesn't need much explanation, right? Logic is when we rely on data and facts and figures to help make our points. Unfortunately, emotions are also what drive our decisions. So just because we think we have a foolproof argument doesn't mean that people are going to say yes, which is why we need to think about the other influencing strategies. Inspire is when we can help people see a compelling vision of the future, what the future could look like. And when they can see it and it's exciting for them, they will feel inspired. Consultation is when we co-create something, when we ask others what their thoughts are about a problem or a situation that you maybe need them to support you in. Feel good is literally when we make people feel good. In fact, when we are able to raise people's mood, it gives us a lot of reference power, right? We become much more likable. But even simple things like bringing a packet of biscuits to a meeting sometimes will put a smile on people's face and give them that sense of feel good. And then finally, exchange. This is very much a deal, right? If you do this, then I'll do that. And thinking about what are some of the things that I can offer in exchange for what I want. So you might want to pause the webinar here and again, think about which of these come most easily, most naturally to you, and which of these might you want to try and implement next time you'd like to influence someone. The final thing we're going to think about is the idea of how do we balance power and influence. Whenever we have power, we also have responsibility to think about the impact it has on others. In fact, Adam Kahan, who is one of the world's probably most prominent facilitators, he has addressed many huge social challenges like food poverty, like climate change, with many of the world's leaders and politicians. And he has recently written a book called Power and Love. And especially when it comes to the word love, it doesn't quite get used so much in a work context. In fact, in a talk that he gives about the book, he jokes that when he uses the title of the book in his email subjects, they always end up in spam. But the idea is how we combine power and love together whenever we are around others. And he talks that sometimes power and influence can be generative. It can be used in a way that really helps engage others around us, that asserts others' abilities, and so can be used in a really positive way. Unfortunately, when we don't think about the impact that we have and we pay no attention to it, our power can become degenerative and it can feel really imposing and also manipulative to those people around us. Clearly, not something that we would aim for. So then the question is, how do we make sure that our power is generative rather than degenerative? And one of the key things that can help us here is to make sure that we don't avoid tunnel vision, that actually we are not so caught up in our agenda, in what we want to achieve, that we forget about other people around us. And so one thing that can help is us pausing and thinking about some of these questions that are here on the slide. Things such as, am I listening to other people's perspectives? Sometimes, because what we're talking about is so important to us, because we are so passionate about it, we might forget to pause and really make sure that we hear what other people have to say. Now, this is particularly problematic if we are the most senior person in the room, because if we are showing our perspective and maybe not allowing others to give their perspectives, then we end up creating an environment, a scenario where people might actually be quite reluctant to tell us what they think. So it is much more effective, and we are much more likely to get what's really going on if we first, as leaders, listen to other people's perspectives before we give ours. The second thing that's worth reflecting on is, are you acting in line with your values? And again, for me, in order to be able to answer this question, first of all, we need to have given some thought as to what our values are. What are the things that are so important to us in terms of how we show up, what we give attention to, what we give time to? And sometimes when we are under pressure, or when we have extremely high demands of ourselves, it might lead us to feel like we cannot act in line with our values. But this is always a bad idea, because it creates a lot of internal tension and stress. Another question to reflect on is, am I being considerate of other people's needs? When things come easily to us, when we have certain preferences, it's so easy as human beings to fall into the trap of assuming that other people think the same, feel the same way. But the reality is very different. Just because maybe something might feel easy for us doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to feel easy for others. Or just because something is important or not important for us doesn't necessarily mean that other people are going to feel the same way. So taking some time to reflect on these questions can really help us. Something else to think about is how we are using our power. And one of the ways in which we can use it is to find ways to benefit others. If we remember those two questions earlier, can I trust you? Can you help me? This is very much something that's going to get us a yes in both those scenarios. So really think about, what opportunities can you provide others? What kind of development can you offer them? How can you advocate for them or celebrate success? And what we're doing here is we are sharing our power for the benefit of others. So again, take some time to really think about, what is it that you can do to use your power to benefit those around you. Now, we've covered quite a few things here. First of all, we've talked about personal power. And personal power is something that we can all develop irrespective of the level of authority that we have. And there are four different types of power here. Referent power, how likable we are, very much around warmth, how present we are with people, how encouraging we are. Do we make people around us feel good? The second type of personal power is expert power. What are the things that we are experts in, the qualifications we have, the experience we have that can be really valuable for other people? And are we making sure that we are visible and that expertise is visible? The third thing to think about is how much informational power you have. What information do you have that is valuable for others? And then finally, connection, the quality of our network. So really making sure that we have the right people in our network. We've also talked about four different tools, such as thinking how we can demonstrate a balance between competence as well as warmth, because we need both for people to truly be willing to follow us and also to admire us and want to do the things that are important for us. Secondly, remember, let's promote what we know through everyday opportunities, whether it's on social media, whether it's meetings, whether it's in everyday conversations. Strategically building our network, especially making use of those connectors in our network to gain an access to a wider network. And then finally, making sure that we are managing our mindset and our perspective so that the power that we do have is generative. So I hope that this has given you some food for thought and some ideas as to both how to elevate your power, how to influence others, and ultimately how to make sure that you have a positive impact on those around you. Thank you all so much.